Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. This video is titled, British Columbia Green Party Leader Predicts 16 Feet of Sea Level Rise. Andrew Weaver is head of the Green Party in British Columbia, and he's also a lead author at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Let's examine Andrew Weaver's claim from 2009. The West Antarctic ice sheet is roughly the size of the American Southwest. In recent years, nearby smaller chunks have disintegrated and others are close to collapsing. The studies have a take-home message that unless something is done to curb emissions soon, this would commit us to an inevitable 5-meter, 16.4-foot sea level rise over the next several centuries, said Andrew Weaver, a climate scientist at the University of Victoria in Canada, who wasn't part of either study. Andrew Weaver is now head of the Green Party in British Columbia. Let's look now at Andrew Weaver's claim that CO2 emissions are going to cause 5 meters of sea level rise. First thing we notice is that there's been no change in sea level in British Columbia over the past century. And in fact, sea level in British Columbia is currently near a record low. At the century rate of sea level rise in British Columbia, it will take approximately infinity years for sea level to rise 5 meters. NOAA says that the absolute global sea level rise rate is believed to be 1.7 to 1.8 millimeters per year. So globally, it will take over 2,500 years for sea level to rise 5 meters. Over the last 20,000 years, sea level has risen about 400 feet. Climate scientists believe that the first 400 feet of sea level rise was completely natural, but the last few millimeters were man-made. Note that the natural sea level rise from 20,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago was much faster than the current man-made sea level rise. 20,000 years ago, Florida was more than twice as wide as it is now. This sea level rise was completely natural. Now let's look at Andrew Weaver's claim that collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet is due to carbon dioxide. This was the lead story in the Chicago Tribune 40 years ago. Flood threat from polar ice. Dr. Richard Cameron, National Science Foundation Program Manager for Glaciology. We're seeing the West ice sheet on its way out, said Cameron. It seems to be doing something completely different from the East ice sheet. It has nothing to do with a warmer climate, just the dynamics of unstable ice. And in 1932, it was reported that the Ross Ice Shelf in West Antarctica had retreated 30 miles since it was first seen and surveyed, and that the process may have been going on for centuries. So it's pretty clear that the retreat of the West Antarctic Ice Shelf has nothing to do with carbon dioxide. As the National Science Foundation Program Manager said, it has nothing to do with a warmer climate, just the dynamics of unstable ice. And this was 1977 during the global cooling scare. Satellites show that there's been no change in Antarctic temperature over the last 40 years. It's pretty difficult to make the case that carbon dioxide is melting Antarctic ice when the temperature isn't changing in Antarctica. And in 2004, NASA's head of climate analysis, Gavin Schmidt, said that surface temperatures in Antarctica had decreased significantly. It's interesting that Andrew Weaver, an IPCC lead author, would not have mentioned any of these inconvenient facts. Furthermore, 2 years ago, NASA said that Antarctica is gaining ice, not losing it. That means that the net contribution to sea level from Antarctica is making sea level lower. Let's look at sea level in a few other places. The blue line here shows the 100-month sea level rise rate at Key West, Florida. Sea level at Key West, Florida fluctuates greatly on about an 11-year cycle between about plus 13 millimeters per year and minus 8 millimeters per year. Current sea level rise rates are no higher than they were in the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1970s. Now let's focus on the yellow line on the graph, which is sunspot cycles. Note that sunspots vary on an 11-year cycle and that sea level loosely tracks the sunspot cycle. So sea level rise rates correlate much more closely with sunspot cycles than they do with carbon dioxide. And we see exactly the same pattern in other tide gauges like Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Manhattan. It's interesting that the IPCC has not made any mention of this close correlation between sunspot cycles and sea level rise rates. Andrew Weaver's forecast of 5 meters of sea level rise seems to be well out of the range of IPCC predictions. As an IPCC lead author, it seems odd that he would step so far out of bounds. And the 1990 IPCC report said, there is no convincing evidence of an acceleration in global sea level rise during the 20th century. For longer periods, however, there is weak evidence for an acceleration over the last 2 to 3 centuries. That tells us that it has nothing to do with humans or carbon dioxide. Andrew Weaver's claims don't seem to be supported by science. Weaver is currently suing Tim Ball, the great Canadian climatologist, for defamation. I'm an expert witness in that trial, but for some reason Weaver's attorneys chose not to cross-examine me. I wonder why not. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.